when in fact we get some estimate of what building costs will be from the facilities committee. As a financial task force, we will not be dealing with facility issues. I know that from time to time some of you are going to be on the facilities task force and you may come in with information about what the facilities people are working on. But we will try our best to just focus on, when we receive a number from them, what we might need to do to finance it or how to pay for it. It really gets tough down toward the end when they come up with a project and a dollar cost for us to want to talk about the project and maybe changing the project so that it might be less expensive. If you feel like that's where you want to be, it's important that you would be on the facilities task force, not the financial task force, because our job is carved out just to deal with the financial aspect of things. So it's my responsibility to be your resource. We're going to go through a couple of things today where we want to get everything on the table about what you're interested in trying to do, what you're interested in trying to learn. I'm going to coordinate those resources so that you can have experts, in addition to myself, come in and talk to you and provide the information that you might want and need for the various items that you're looking at. In addition to that, I will also provide for you information that I maintain on the community as well, and then provide you interpretations about that information as we go through. Before I get too far into things, the first thing I'd like to do, in addition to myself, is introduce the treasurer of the school district and CFO, Kathy Schuler. She is acting as the videographer for today's evening. Today's meeting. I am using Facebook Live, so we're currently, I believe, are we live? If someone out there is watching and you have my cell phone number, text me and let me know if we're coming through. So I'll give you guys a heads up that we're actually streaming. I set this all up myself, so I am really impressed with myself. I'm doing everything. I'm doing your technology, I'm doing everything, including bringing projectors and doing that. So from time to time, bear with me, okay? It's not always going to be perfect, but I promise you at the very end you'll be satisfied.
You didn't say your phone number. What's your phone number?
Oh, it's on the front of the presentation. Yeah, and there's a lot of you that have taken full advantage of my phone number and my text and my email. You know, I tell you what, you guys are wonderful. I really, I mean, I've talked to a lot of you. I really enjoy the conversations. You guys are great, and we're going to get to know each other even better. So our team is myself and Kathy Schuler. Kathy will be becoming more involved as we talk about the school district's financial condition, but that won't happen for about 3 meetings. But before then, let me ask for a couple of volunteers as we go forward, and I need someone that feels like they can be here for every meeting. The first, and I think I do have a note taker. Julie has volunteered to take notes. What we're going to do when I have interactions with you, if you have a question, and this will happen, you'll have questions about some of the research that I have, and you'll say, hey David, can we find out something else about that, or can we compare ourselves to this particular group? Julie's going to take that information down so that I don't forget it, and then I'm going to research, I'm going to take the information back with me, do the research, and at the beginning of every meeting I will answer all the research questions that you give me from the meeting before. And so don't be bashful about asking questions. I have a ton of data in this computer right here, and from time to time I can actually jump out of the presentation and go live and start looking at things for you. So you'll be pleased with that. So I have someone to take notes. I wouldn't mind having someone also volunteer to do what Kathy is currently doing, and she's handling the iPad video. When it's her turn to actually do her work, would someone be willing to volunteer to be my videographer for the presentation process, which means basically sitting there for 2 hours with the iPad in your hand and scanning the room? Anyone? No volunteers? Okay, what's your name?
Tracy.
Tracy has volunteered. Can you put that? Thank you very much. All right, I appreciate that. The third person that we need to have volunteer would be just someone that could get here just a little bit early, because again, it's just Kathy and myself. They could get here just a little bit early just to make sure the rooms are set up. Sometimes I'm traveling from far distances to get here, and it's difficult for me to predict whether or not 71 or 75 is going to be backed up, and it'd be nice to make sure that we've got someone that could get to the meeting a half hour before just to make sure everything is good to go. Can someone be willing to do that for me as well? What was your name?
Jeff.
Jeff. All right, great. All right, so we got our volunteers. We're squared away at this particular point. What I'd like to do is talk about the meeting topics, and then we're going to move into establishing our goals for the process. Today we're going to focus on sort of the basic background of the school district itself and your community. And the purpose of this, and each time I do a meeting, believe it or not, there's a reason behind it. So I'm creating for you building blocks that ultimately in 4, 5, 6, 10 months, you'll be able to reference back to things that will help you make decisions. And some of the things that we'll be talking about today, standalone, may not necessarily mean anything to you, but they will mean something to you later on. And then on a number of occasions, I'll actually point out to you the things that are very specific that matter. And so on your documents, just take a marker or a pen, draw a circle around it, and then we'll be set and ready to go to do that. In addition to that, anything that you want me to stop and explain, just ask me. I don't mind stopping and explaining, but we do need to keep our eye on the time. So I don't want to necessarily be here beyond 2 hours, although it's not uncommon for meetings to run 2.5 hours because I'm so exciting. People can't leave the room. They just hate to get out of here. Speaking of which, I forgot to get a timer, a volunteer to be my official timer. Does anyone want to volunteer to let me know when 15 minutes goes by, so just kind of keep me on track because I have a tendency to wander. It's usually somebody better in the back of the room. All right. Thank you. What was your name?
Vicki.
Vicki? Thanks, Vicki, for volunteering to do that because I'll need it. So we'll cover the background on the community today, first part. So it's part A, background on the community. And then the next meetings will start to drill down into more detail, and I'll also start to bring in speakers that will be able to explain various things to you about different things in financing. Let me remind you and encourage you that this is an area that no one knows anything about. So feel free to ask any question that you want to ask. There are very, very few people in the state of Ohio. Do you have copies? Oh, we have copies of the presentation available. Does anyone need a copy? Want a copy? So as I mentioned once before, this is sort of like a crash course master's degree in school funding. Do not hesitate to ask a question. There are so few people that have the background and knowledge that I have about school funding that don't waste the opportunity to pick my brain. And you'll be very, very pleased that you did. And there are no dumb questions because I mentioned to you before, some of the best financing structures that have ever worked came from someone asking a question that's never been asked before and thought about from a different perspective. So let's hear from you in that regard. Let me start by making sure that you guys are familiar with Rockmill. This is my 29th year. I specialize in tax methodology and taxation policy development, budgets for governments, and projections. So all of those things will be germane as we go forward. Debt issuance options, community engagement, and research and analysis. And I've been doing it for 29 years. I have worked with about 125 school districts and have a lot of background in that area. My goal is to provide you some background through this process on the demographics of the community, how schools function, how they're funded, to focus at some point on the district's financial condition so that we can deal with this overall picture. So it is your responsibility isn't going to be just on how to fund the facilities, but how to also look at the long-term needs of the district from an operating perspective. Because at some point, when you make a decision about what you want to do going forward, I would suspect that your neighbors would want to know, well, what about our operating needs? And if we're building buildings or renovating buildings, is that having some bearing on the operating taxes of the district as we go down the road? So we'll focus on that. And then we're going to deal with the financing tools that are available to the school district. A financing tool is the instrument that you can use to borrow money. So for example, in your personal life, you have a number of different financing tools, but you never really think about it. You have a credit card, which is a financing tool that functions differently than the mortgage on your house, which is another financing tool. And some of you might actually lease your car or lease your equipment on the farm, which is yet another financing tool. So these financing tools that apply to you in your personal life also apply to governments. And each of those tools have different pros and cons to how they're used and how much they cost the community. So we're going to learn about all of the financing tools that governments, and in particular the school district, have at its disposal to finance the facilities that they want to do that. Then we're going to also, through this whole process, look at developing a funding plan. Funding is different than financing. Financing is the tool that you use to borrow money to do what you need to do. Funding is how you pay for it. It's where the money comes from to pay for either the financing or the cost of the project in general. So that becomes a much broader conversation because you'll learn that schools only have a few financing tools available to them, but the funding sources are as broad as we can come up with. So it can go from naming rights to facilities, it could be grants, it could be taxes raised at the local level, it could be taxes raised at the county level. It could be cash contributions from donors through a fundraising initiative. It can be any one of those things that the school district might have at its disposal, and we're going to understand what they are and then begin to see if they're realistic for the use of funding these school buildings, both from a cost perspective and a time perspective, because at some point the community may decide you want to move forward. And I will tell you, we really don't have a set timeline on how long it takes us to do this. It's really up to you all and to the facilities committee as to how fast or how slow you want to move. So, and I'm in for as long as you want to take to work through it. But we're going to learn all those different things. Ultimately, once we have all of that information, education, and knowledge of options, this particular group will craft what you think is the best funding option for the school district to proceed with, and make that recommendation known to the school board so that they are aware of what your interests and desires are. I would like to also make sure that the school board is aware as we move along so that there's no last minute surprises. So at some point, I would ask you all if you would mind if one or two board members sat in strictly as observers so they can hear and learn what you're hearing and learning, so there are no surprises down at the end of the road. But we'll come back to that at some point in the future and talk. So what I'd like to do now is just first start with a conversation with everybody in the room. This is just open mic night, or at least open mic. How far am I? Is it 7:30 yet? 7:23? Let me start with, and Julie, get ready. Get your pencil sharpened. Not everyone has to weigh in on this, and I'm going to try my best to encourage you to speak up and say what's on your mind. But tell me from a goal perspective, what is it that you would like to see as a result of this process? Or is there something in particular that you've heard about that for funding schools that you would want to make sure you learn about through this process? So that I'm not just operating from the standard old-fashioned list of things. So as someone heard that a community did a fundraiser. Yes, ma'am?
The difference on how you can get funds from property tax versus income tax.
Okay, so the difference between property tax and income tax. I can do that for you. Yes, sir?
Throw sales tax into the mix.
The sales tax. So we want to look at the opportunities to use sales taxes to do that. Any other ideas? Yes, ma'am?
You mentioned a naming fund. Is that something where you have like bricks with people's names on it that you...
It could be that simple, naming rights, or so can everyone hear everyone when they're speaking? Okay, back in the back. Yeah, so that there's two really components. Naming rights is the opportunity to partner with usually the private sector or private business, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And they would make a donation too, and we'll go into a whole class on that. But they would make a donation for the opportunity to have their name placed on the auditorium if there's an auditorium, and in return they give you some money to do that. Or you can be, it's just as simple as the old-fashioned fundraising by names on bricks and selling maybe things from the old buildings. I've had school districts that sold the old chairs and desks from the old school buildings. So everything is on the table as a way of raising money, but that's a good idea, so make sure we have that down. Yes, ma'am?
Ohio House bills that are in the works.
So something that's currently pending, looking at if there are any opportunities there. You all saw the legislation that Sherrod Brown is working on, and I think I sent around to the group. Did everyone see that notice? No? Sherrod Brown is working on a proposal in Congress to allow the federal government to create additional low-interest financing for school districts, in particular in Ohio. He's been working on it for about a year. It's still slowly making progress, and if you all remember back during the financial market collapse, the federal government created a stimulus program called the American Recovery and ARRA.
Investment Act.
Right, Reinvestment Act. Under that program, the federal government created what were theoretically 0% bonds so that school districts could borrow money at 0% to build school buildings. This program would be somewhat similar to that program, where there could be the opportunity to borrow money at 0% interest. And what we'll do is we'll keep our eyes on legislative opportunities that are out there. In addition to that, you also don't necessarily have to be wallflowers. You're going to learn things about your funding circumstances that you'll say, well, that's just not fair. Why aren't we getting more money than some of the other school districts? Because you're going to hear, you guys already heard, that our funding from the state grant program for school buildings is way down the list, and it's based on some things that we'll talk about today. You may say that's not fair. As taxpayers and citizens of the state of Ohio, you have just as much right to lobby for law changes as the corporations that do. And it could be that you come out of this situation saying, we'd like to lobby for law changes. We'd like to say, because of certain circumstances that we've learned about from David Connolly, who's an extraordinary teacher, that we should change the laws. I always tell my kids, we're in control of our own lives, especially when it comes to government. We just have forgotten we are. And someone needs to remind us, and every once in a while, that's my responsibility. We're not victims in any of the issues related to taxation and how governments support us. We put every politician in office who represents us and makes the laws. We have all the ability in the world to change that. But we should know why, and we should know how it all ties together, and that's what I'll do for you. Yes, ma'am?
Are there sources for grants other than the Ohio state one that you're talking about?
There
now?
could be, depending on the project. And I had somebody call me, I tell you, I'm getting some great feedback. There are some people contacting me about green initiatives. Apparently the community here is very close to and connected with the ability or the desires to build buildings that are sustainable and have green components to them. There are various grant programs that are available today that allow you to access funds for green initiatives and so many other initiatives that are out there. What it requires is a marriage of people that are interested in looking for additional grant money, which could be this particular group, and what the facility might be or facilities might be in the future so that you can connect it. In the past, there have been other grant programs, safe passage to school programs, where you can combine grant monies for road improvements and bikeways and parkways and things like that that might enhance the quality of the project. So yes, grants would be there, and if you could add that to the list, we can start looking down that.
Who would write the grants in the school district?
Generally, that would come from the treasurer's office, and you might be having some additional work as it comes along. But yeah, and in some cases, some school districts, larger school districts, actually have grant writers on staff. I don't think you guys do, because you run a pretty lean ship in there. So, but it doesn't mean that the district couldn't possibly contract independently, because I know there are grant writers that work as consultants, and you could hire them and bring them in. Any other ideas? Yes, ma'am.
Does the school district have any personal policies against where we get money from? And I'll give an example of, there's some school districts that will not do naming fundraisers. They don't want to put names on stadiums or athletic buildings or wings of school or anything like that. So has this school district ever created a policy like that that's in some bylaws somewhere?
I'm not aware of it, but we'll know by the time we get to the end of this process if there are. There are some limitations that aren't necessarily policy limitations at the school district level. There are certain legal limitations as well that we would investigate. I have a whole list of attorneys that at any given point we can have come in and explain to us what the limitations are, so we understand the way that we can engage with naming rights. Elyria Schools just had their stadium. They raised $500,000 for their stadium using naming rights. But there's a lot of different ways to go about it, and then we can investigate that down there. I saw a hand over here. Yes, sir.
Look at the partnership with, say, BGSU. I think BGSU is able to get money through the state legislature to help with the new senior center.
Mhm.
Whether or not something could happen that way, or maybe BCI has a headquarters in down here, whether or not money could come through there for chemistry labs or biology labs or any STEM stuff.
So possibly public partnerships as one way to do things. So if you add public, and that isn't out of the realm of reality. All over the state, there are a number of community school districts that have partnered with cities, and it's usually related to recreation centers. So with the construction of new buildings, school buildings, they're including recreation as a part of it to serve a certain segment of the community. But it doesn't have to be limited to that. Cincinnati Public Schools, which is a client of mine, has partnered with health partners that provide health clinics within their school buildings, and they share the costs of space using and providing health clinics. Richmond Heights School District in the Cleveland area is partnering with the County Library District, and so the library is actually putting a satellite library inside of the new K-8 building and paying for that particular space, which is saving the cost of that to go to the taxpayers. So the public-public partnerships make a lot of sense, and they work really well as long as you have lead time to work on them. But we'll also put that on the list of talking about how you identify possible partners. It actually begins right now with whoever might be watching on Facebook and hearing this conversation, because you never know. The college could be saying, you know, maybe there's something we can do in conjunction that might be based on an educational platform, you know, or possibly something with the city that might be based on a safety concept, or, you know, the sky's the limit. But yes, we'll put that on the list. Okay, thank you very much. Any other? Yes, sir.
I'm interested in at the outcome of this. A deliverable would be something that I'd be able to take and share.
A deliverable?
With anyone in the community to show, like, we did our work.
Yeah.
Here's why we chose what we did, and being able to help explain here's why we didn't choose X, Y, Z that you may be considering.
That's right.
As I'm talking to people, my friends and family in the community.
Yeah, we're going to have, as we go through this, we're going to be able to say, you know, that just isn't going to work, given the circumstances that we have. But I want to give every opportunity a chance, you know, and to look at it. And people will be able to see us doing it in real time, so that when we get to the very end, they'll see how we went from point A to point Z and come up with an idea. Any other ideas? Yes.
Is it possible to actually change the district? In other words, some of the area that's closer to Patrick Henry School District, start going there. Some that are closer to Macomb, North Baltimore, to actually change the configuration of the district.
So put that down as something to look at, and the answer is yes, but that's a very, very broad concept, and one that could take many years to really work through, but we'll talk about it. And I had that question come up last night, actually, where a district was curious about merging with another district and what that meant to the taxpayers. So that's not a bad question to investigate. I still have a few more ideas in my head. I haven't heard all of them yet. We had sales tax, income tax versus property tax. The sales tax, did someone mention sales tax, Julie? Yes. Okay. The other one is that is an income tax that's not necessarily a school district income tax. There's an income tax structure whereby a city can put an income tax on and then use the city's income tax to support the construction of school facilities. I'm not promoting the idea, but I think we should investigate the idea, because it is, the city income tax is different than a school district income tax. And so we'll learn about that process as well and go through it. Anything else?
You mentioned that there's different kinds of income taxes. Are there
different ways a school district could use an income tax,
Yes.
as opposed to just the one way that's available now.
Okay, so we want to put down the different ways that a school district can use an income tax. Okay. How about the sale of land? The school district has property that is currently occupied by buildings that may not be occupied by buildings, and if they're not, you now have land that's available potentially to be sold to raise money to fund buildings. So we could put that on the list of investigating ways of possibly raising money. Does that trigger any thoughts on anyone? Okay, so fundraisers. I think that's about it, but I want to make sure we don't leave anything off the table that we can investigate. And just because we don't necessarily get it right now, doesn't mean that as we go through the process, you don't come back later and say, hey, David, I've got an idea. Let's think about this or some other thing. And also, as we're doing this, don't necessarily take off the table thinking of a new way of taxing that might be applicable to the circumstances of the community. I mentioned to you that we have a lot of power as citizens in a community, and if there are things that apply to us that are unique, it doesn't mean that we can't pursue those as a way to accomplish the goals that we might need to accomplish as we go down the road. Yes, sir.
Investigate adapting the current funding structure to meet
Very.
what's possible, because I know there's limitations based on, for say, income tax, because of the way we have it structured now. Until that income tax is set for renewal, we couldn't investigate something like a value, or it's slipping my mind, where you exclude the elderly and yeah. That's
another good point. So within the school district's current tax structure is the ability, potentially the ability, to move things around, if you will, and kind of reallocate and distribute how money is spent and how it might be altered in the future. So it's potentially replacing the use of one type of a levy for another so that we can impact taxpayers. So we'll investigate that. That's a really good one, actually. It's one of the techniques that I use too to look at how to get the bond issue size down. So at some point, if there's, if they come back with a dollar amount, let's say it's 20 million bucks, and we want to try to get 20 million down to 10 million, one of the ways that we can do that is possibly reallocating the use of resources that the district already has. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second, but I appreciate that's a good one. Yes, ma'am.
Are we going to get into studying demographics of the community, and maybe our charge would be to decide what will sell, what won't sell, how we sell it? Will we be getting into that at all?
We will be. In fact, the very next page is the beginning of that conversation. I will tell you that so this is more than just figuring out how to fund this project. This whole process is really about how you look your neighbor in the face and say to them, we did our best to come up with the best way to do this. And in order to do that, we have to understand who we are as a community. And so my first meeting is to begin to build on just who we are. So you have an idea of what Bowling Green Schools is and who you're made up of and what you might look like 10 years from now. Always keep in mind the things we look at in these classes are simply a snapshot of who you are today. It is not a prediction of who you'll be 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And the decisions that will be made ultimately will be decisions that have a 30-year life, maybe a 50-year life. I mean, some of your buildings are around a long time. So I will encourage you and challenge you to think about the fact that we're making decisions not just about right now and about how it feels to you right now. We're going to be making decisions about how it will feel to potentially our grandkids or our great-grandkids 25 years from now. And it's a legacy that we'll be creating through our effort, and we want to create the best possible outcome that we can for now and for the future as we go through it. Before I flip the slide and get into the fun stuff, any last ideas that you all might want to?
Yeah, about merging different options, like so everyone shares the load more. like an earned income tax coupled with like a property tax or something along those lines. to
Okay,
try to
look
balance it
at,
out.
look at the ability of combining different types of taxes.
Yeah.
Okay. So we could do that.
What are the resources for the projections that you were just talking about of the needs? Do you have resources for that information?
Which,
For projecting use of attendance and data on number
do
of
we have,
students?
yeah, well, yes, we will have projections for, like for enrollment and
Right.
things like that, yes. The district will have those, and if we don't have them, I'm really good at making stuff up. So we'll make it up as we go. I saw one more hand over here, yes.
Just an idea for fundraising, some kind of a contest. You know, we raise money 50-50 at football games, something like that.
Mhm.
And then also, the lottery and the casinos were supposed to be education funding, and we could look into what they can offer as well.
And so you guys are not too terribly far from a casino, it's right down the road. Yeah, so those are, so if we can look at the existing lottery money and the casino monies, both of which are so small anymore, but yeah, we can put that on the table and look at it. And we'll get into that, especially when it comes into the operations of the school district and how that money is being applied today for the operations of the district. Okay. Any other ideas? All right, remember, the door is always open on the ideas, so we can't, we can move right along and do this. So let's talk about the school district. It doesn't seem focused anymore. Okay, I like this. The state of Ohio Department of Education has a map of every school district in the state of Ohio, and it's a gigantic map. I love it because it's got tons of colors on it. But I just took a snapshot of the districts that are over here in this corner of the state. Put you guys right in the middle. And the reason I use this is starting out with, I typically do our first level of comparisons just on the communities that are around us, just kind of our neighbors, if you will. And the main reason that I do that is that typically when you compare yourself to someone, you're comparing yourself to someone that's close to you. You rarely ever compare yourself to someone that's far, far, far away. So I start with the local level, see who we're around, and that's kind of a nice picture of the districts that surround us. You're right in the heart of things. I had a lot of fun with this. You guys have 3,000 students in this district. 150 square miles. Are you aware that this district's 150 square miles? I didn't know that. Holy cow.
Bus drivers know that.
Holy cow.
They do.
Okay. Frame of reference. City of Philadelphia is only 135 square miles. Okay. You're almost twice the size of the city of Toledo. Twice the square mile, almost. Twice the size of the city of Toledo. That in and of itself is an interesting dynamic. This is a gigantic school district from a territory perspective. And not only that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 communities that make up this community. Now, some to a smaller degree, but where you see the percentages, this isn't based on population. It's the percentages based on the value of the property that's in the school district. So the school district is generally measured by how much property is in it. And the primary basis for taxation under the Ohio school funding formula is how much property value is within a school district. So that is the basis. So based on that, the city of Bowling Green is the largest from a property perspective. But residents from every one of these communities contribute to the overall financial operations of the district, and in one form or another. But this right here pretty surprised me, and with the bus drivers being out there on the road quite a bit. So transportation is an issue. The district currently has 5 school buildings. This is a new slide that I started using because I was in a school district the other day where a resident wanted to know if the school buildings had been paid off. They had a number of school buildings. Because his philosophy was that you shouldn't borrow money for a new school building until all of your old school buildings are paid for. And and everyone has a philosophy. I started in 1988 in this business, and a lot of communities in Ohio had a basic philosophy that was called pay-as-you-go. You familiar with that technology, that term? Pay-as-you-go means you use cash to build your buildings. So you make a decision today that we want to build a new building 20 years from now, and you just start saving for that building, and then 20 years from now, you pay cash for it, and you just do it. And that was kind of the common way that many governments in Ohio actually funded their buildings in the past. They would, you know, and in some cases, they would, believe it or not, even pass a tax, just not as high of a tax, and use that tax to save up toward the construction of a new building. It didn't end up working so well. Remember, how many of you guys bought a house when mortgage rates were 12 and 15%? Remember when Jimmy Carter was president and inflation came in? The problem happened, what happened was the project started to skyrocket in cost because of inflation, and it became more difficult to pay as you go, so then borrowing became the more common way in Ohio, especially to pay for school buildings. So we've been benefiting quite a bit over the last 20 years from low inflation and the ability to pay for things with cash, but we've been cash strapped because of the recession. You know, we haven't had as much money as governments and as individuals to be able to save the money we need to pay for things, and that's driven the borrowing load in this country. In fact, today, notwithstanding the federal deficit and the borrowing at the federal level, but borrowing at the local level is at the highest point it's been in history. So governments across the country in the United States have more debt outstanding than they have ever had in the history of the United States. So that includes states, counties, cities, school districts, villages, townships, the whole shebang. And one of the challenges about that is that the last year of the baby boom was 1964, I think. That's the year I was born, so I'm the last of the baby boomers. There's this pretty significant population drop-off after, when I kick the bucket and I'm out of the scene. We are going to have a lot of debt that's remaining in this community, not this community in particular, but nationally, with not as many people to make the payments on those taxes that are needed to support the debt. But it's important to know in your case that your building, your Conneaut was built in 1954. It was upgraded, or at least additions added to it in 1987. You guys know your own town better than I do, so you can probably tell me what happened in 1987. Something happened in 1987, but it's paid for. Okay, so it's paid off. Crim, built in 1957. Some things done in 1963 and in 2012. It's paid for, and no outstanding debt. Kenwood, built in 53 and 88, it's paid for. The middle school really is, and the Performing Arts Center are the only facilities that still have debt outstanding associated with it. The debt's now paid down to $22 million. It gets paid off. The last payment is in 2034. When it was originally borrowed, it was $27,500,000, and you all approved that for 2.93 mils. It's now down to 2.55 mils. So the tax rate that's needed to pay that debt back is declining. I will show you in a second. Take your marker and draw a circle around that 2.93 down to 2.55. That will become a part of the discussion of how your tax base changes, and how when a tax starts at one level now, it could be at a different level at some point in the future. So this has a basis for our conversation. The middle school addition currently is being done as a lease purchase. So I mentioned to you that schools have different tools. Instead of them using a bond or getting a mortgage, they actually leased the improvements to this particular project. It's down to $4,160,000. In the structure that it's in, it is not a bond that's or a financing that's being directly paid back by a tax that you approved for that purpose. The district did a permanent improvement levy, which under the law can be used to pay for improvements to buildings, and that's how that's being paid for currently with the PI levy. It will be paid off in 2037. Make a note. Yes, sir.
$4,385,000 being paid for permanent improvement levy.
Yes, sir.
Did the voters vote on
On the project,
that, on the ability to use that funding for that
yes.
project?
Yeah, when the permanent improvement levy under Ohio law has the ability to be designated for a very specific purpose or for a more broad purpose, which includes the permanent improvements to school facilities. This particular levy is one that's approved as a broader purpose levy, which allows the district to make the decision to use it for any capital improvement. A capital improvement there's two words that mean the same thing: permanent improvement and capital improvement. Both are improvements that are for things that have a life of 5 years or longer, so a life expectancy. And go ahead and get the terminology down because we'll be using this a lot. In meeting number 4, we'll be talking about permanent improvement levies, possibly redirecting existing permanent improvement levies and replacing them with something else. You know, that kind of a concept. So
This necessarily, not to interrupt,
No, that's good.
necessarily wasn't brought to the voters as per se this thing. It was deemed by the board to use these funds to build.
Right, so school, and it's not an uncommon decision. Many school districts around the state, schools do not have the ability to borrow money without going to the voters. And in a case where a school district actually can pay for something without going to the voters, they can do it using a lease purchase. So in this particular case, the board decided they could actually afford to make the payments on $4 million to make the improvements to the middle school without actually having to put a bond issue on the ballot and increase your taxes to do it.
So current total debt is 26 million?
Yes. And to be more specific, debt, financing tool number 1, 22 million, lease, 4 million.
Still
So,
26.
yeah, but the district's obligated to make payments on 26 million. The key thing about this piece right here, now not that it would ever happen, is that as a lease, the board isn't legally obligated to make the payments on that every year. It's like leasing a car. You can give it back if you don't want it. But giving back an extension to the middle school may not necessarily be the easiest
You
thing to do.
think that's possible?
No, not at all. Absolutely not. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question as far as I understand where Mr. Chamberlain's kind of coming from, is I lived here since I was a long time ago, taught here, and not one time do I remember the bond issue being sold to us as something where the monies would actually be taken eventually to be used as an addition to a school, versus maybe like an addition onto a cafeteria or something like that. So when you go to write the bond issue, say we want to remodel or do new buildings, how do we, I guess, ensure the credibility then? Like, how do people know that that bond issue will not get used in a whole different intended purpose like that? And I think that's where the credibility is going to be.
So, and I want to make sure what I do, and when I do this, please don't ever take offense. What I want to do is make sure that we all learn as we go along. So what you're really saying is the PI levy, the use of the PI levy, not the bond issue, because they're different kinds of
Right,
things.
the permanent improvements.
Right,
I
so-
mean, as being as a teacher.
Right.
And a citizen, it was sold to us as something different.
Yeah, so a permanent improvement levy, the ballot language is, as I mentioned, when you as voters, and everyone in this room voted to approve the permanent improvement levy, the language was broad enough to allow the school board to either fix a roof or borrow money to put a wing on a building. So the language was broad and allowed under the law. You can also have ballot language that is very specific that says that a permanent improvement levy can only be used for technology, for example, and for equipment. The same is true for a bond issue. When you put a bond issue on the ballot, which is a different type of tax, you can say this bond issue is for the purpose of building school buildings. Or you could say this bond issue is for the purpose of building an elementary school located at the site of X and X to have a red roof and green doors. So you can go from being as broad and ambiguous as you want to as specific as you want with the language that's on the ballot. And ultimately, as we go through this process, you all will have the ability to say, how do we want to do this? Do we want to be really specific? Do we want to be really broad? Now, one of the challenges about being specific is that typically when you pass a levy for a tax to do something, there's a lot of unknowns. You don't know exactly what's going to happen 3 years from now. It takes 3 to 5 years to build a building. And if you're too specific, you can end up with a tax that's giving you money that you can't use for the project. So a lot of lawyers will advise their clients to try to leave some wiggle room just in case the project has to take a turn and do that. But your point's well taken, and we'll make, oh, yes.
But if you take something very specific, can you not bring that back to the voters and say, we want to use that money which was specific and broaden it at that time?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, you can come back to the voters as often as you need to come back to the voters to ask for what you need to ask. The question becomes, how practical does that get at some point? You know, and then if you put yourself in a position of an elected official, and you put a tax on and the voters approve it, and then 2 years later you come back and go, oops, I didn't mean that. You know, people begin to wonder whether or not you know what you're doing. So you try to prevent the likelihood that a commitment is so tight that you can't provide yourself the flexibility to work your way out of it. Yes, sir.
The permanent improvement levy, the $4.3 million. Do we know when, which levy that was passed, when it was passed?
Yeah, we do.
And can you also, what type of funding is that? Is that a property tax? Is it a?
I'll show you in a second. Yes, it is a property tax. Would you, Julie, write down that question and put a star on it? We're going to have a whole segment on your tax structure, the school district's taxes and what they're used for. I'll show you the big picture tonight, and then
And into the details of it, then if we're going to get into the weeds on it, we could get the actual language that was on the ballot.
Sure, absolutely.
For that, so we're getting it fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, sir.
This is probably something you're going to get to later as well, but if you look at the annual funding stream from the PI levy, what percentage of it goes to the lease payments for the addition?
Okay, I'll get that for you as well. So we'll follow that up at the next meeting. What percentage of the permanent improvement levy is being used to pay for the 2018 cops? Yes. One more question. Okay, let's move on to the next.
One more.
Yes, sir.
I think it's important that PI levy was established in 1999, correct?
I'll tell you in a second. Off the top of my head, I can't remember.
Because I didn't see it in the slides. And that generates $400,000 a year. Over 19 years, it should be over $9 million in the account.
Well, if they haven't spent it first.
Right.
So they're, I mean,
they're using $4 million. So this took
do me a favor. Remind your name again.
Todd.
Todd. Okay. I will do this at the next meeting. We have a lot to do here, but I don't want to speculate on the numbers. I actually will have the numbers when we get to that. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Let's talk about the school district's enrollment and how you compare it to districts that are in the area. Right now, we're the 9th largest school district in the area by enrollment, and I think there's some pretty fascinating numbers in there. On the county basis, we're the 2nd largest behind Perrysburg, but quite a bit larger than all of the other school districts in the county. When we look at where we are from a
David, I had a question on that enrollment.
Yes.
Could we, just out of curiosity, could we break that down for what's the townships, the surrounding townships enrollment is versus the city enrollment? Is that a possibility?
When you say like where the kids come from?
Yeah, basically. I'm just trying to compare.
I don't know if we can do that or not.
Goes by zip code.
Yeah.
No, but you can get that from EMIS.
Okay.
We can, Kathy, can't we? Where the kids live, their address.
Yeah.
I don't need that. Just the numbers would be enough.
No,
I'm
but
just
what
trying to
saying is
figure
you
out
derive that through their addresses.
the income versus the usage.
How many kids come from
Custer and all that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll see if they can break it out for you, just so you have an idea.
Also on that slide, can you tell us how many taxpayers are paying percentages in each of those townships?
Yes, I can.
Please.
Yeah, if you would put that on the list right there and do that. Yeah, The county auditor's office can provide us a list of the parcels that are located in each of those particular. And so when you say taxpayers.
I mean taxpayers paying
Well,
your bill.
parcels or just individuals?
Individuals.
Okay, good. I'll see what we can get from the county auditor's office. All right. So where were we? We are at the tax base. As I mentioned earlier, the school district's tax base is made up of all real estate that's located in the school district that is not exempt from paying taxes. So generally, governments are exempt from paying taxes, and that would be all governments. Nonprofits, churches, and corporations and businesses that receive abatements or some form of tax incentive so that they don't have to pay taxes for some period of time. So what's left would be everyone else that's required to pay taxes. The numbers that you see on here are not the full value of all property, but the assessed value of all property. The state of Ohio has a system where your taxes are not based on 100% of your property value. Your taxes are actually based on some percentage of your full property value. For houses, you pay taxes based on 35% of the value of your house as determined by the county auditor. So not really on the value of your house as you think it is, it's the value of your house is what the county auditor thinks that your house is worth. So what you're looking at is approximately 35% of the overall tax values. It's not a perfect 35% because you have a number of taxpayers that are businesses that pay taxes at a higher rate than individuals do. But I wanted to give you some frame of reference. We have the second largest property tax base in Wood County. When we look at ourselves in Northwest Ohio, we're the 8th largest in Northwest Ohio. There were some districts on here that I didn't expect to see ahead of us, but Washington is a little bit larger, Springfield's a little bit larger, not by much. But you're keeping pretty good company from the Northwest Ohio perspective. And then, I know you can't see this, not unless, but what I want to do is give you an idea of where you are compared to all the school districts in the state. Yes.
Getting back to her question about releasing some of this outside of the city property, could you provide us with the tax base for the taxes that are brought in to the school system through property that is within the city limits? And then also, you know, how much of that is from the city limits, inside the city limits?
Yes.
And how much is outside the city limits that, in her scenario, would allow these other districts, or those folks, to be allowed to go to those other districts? How would that change Bowling Green City Schools' ranking on the list of affluency?
So what you would like me to do is research how much property tax revenue is coming in from
inside the city limits. The townships won't work because the townships go into the city. So you won't be able to use that as your criteria. You'll have to actually do the city.
Well, I'm just trying to make sure your question is not. You asked me like 6 questions in one statement. Sorry. So bear with me.
Going fast.
Okay. So the first thing is, I think what you're asking me to do is find out how much property tax revenue the school district receives from each of the taxing subdivisions.
No.
He just wants the city limits and then everything else. So
Everything else combined, but not individual. Okay, because, well, I mean, I'll actually show it to you, but the shortcut is these percentages right here. Those percentages are a direct correlation to how much is paid in taxes. Those are the percentages of the property tax base of each subdivision that makes up the school district. And each of those subdivisions pay taxes. So if all of those added up to be 100.
I can tell you Liberty Township goes into Bowling Green. Plain Township goes into the city of Bowling Green.
Right.
Center Township comes into the city of Bowling Green.
Right, and these percentages.
So unless that's pulled out of there.
And these do have that pulled out, but I'll show you when we have the opportunity.
great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no,
But
abs-
just to help validate.
Right. And so what was the second part of your question? If you take
Yeah. if you-
everyone other than the city of Bowling Green
Correct.
and get rid of them,
You're,
would that change your ranking for the state funding?
right.
Okay. Julie, you get that? All right. I can do that as well.
Thank you.
All right.
We're 101 out of how many? Going back
You were
to
one, oh, I'm
state
sorry, I lost track.
funding.
Where were we? We were here.
State- state district.
You are 101 out of 612. Anybody good in math in here? I'm not. What percentage is that?
Do we want to be
Six-
lower
60%.
for more money, or do, right, we want to be lower to get
You
more
want to
money?
be lower for more money. It's actually a two-pronged formula.
So just so we're clear, the average income in the county is about 55,000. In Bowling Green, it's about 65. All you're gonna do, move yourself up that list if you get rid of the outside of the city.
It's not based on income.
But let's be
It's not
honest,
based
look
on
at the property
income.
value in Bowling Green. I mean, you're gonna have this issue. The problem-
See,
it sounds like a colossal waste of a whole lot of time.
No, it's not.
I will be able to show them the information they need, and you guys will have the information, and you can see how it works. And just remember, the problem is to learn before thinking. I'll show you the math, and I'll show you how the state does the formula for your ranking, and then, just a second, and then I'm also here to be practical. It may say that you will jump to #1 on the list for state funding. The next question is, how do you get rid of 12 communities from your school district?
The same way you brought them in?
Yeah, well, it might take you 20 years.
Okay.
Okay, at which point, so this is all about being practical and reasonable. So I'll show you the math, and we'll say, is this something, what will it do for our rank perspective? And then we'll ask ourselves whether or not it's worth a 20-year undertaking to reshape the footprint of the school district, which, by the way, is the Reshape the School District Task Force. It's not what this task force is tasked to do. Okay? So I will make sure we stay on top of that. So let's talk about your tax base and every potential category of taxpayer that exists. So the school district is made up of agricultural property taxpayers, residential, commercial, industrial, utility real, utility personal tangible, which does not exist anymore because of a law change. Businesses lobbied the state of Ohio to eliminate taxes that they had to pay to you as a community under this category. Back to being effective at getting what you want from a tax perspective. Mineral is a very small amount, and then this is our total assessed value. This is the number that your funding from the state of Ohio for operating the school district is based on. It's the number that your funding for the state of Ohio to receive a grant to build new school buildings is based on. And this number has, following the recession, as a total dropped down to $584 million, but since 2014, it's moved back up to $667 million, so it's at the highest point that it has ever been in the history of Bowling Green schools. Now, a lot of that was based on, you'll see this category right here, agriculture. The state of Ohio took agriculture values from 23 million and moved them all the way up to 79 million under a formula designed to have farmers pay more in taxes, plain and simple. That is a significant increase in valuation, not unless you guys found a way to build new farms. That wasn't the case. That is a huge increase in taxes. I've said it before, I'll say it again. And not pleasant at all, especially considering that the school district's tax model is heavily weighted toward property taxes. And this particular category of taxpayers pay a lot in property taxes. During the same time frame, residential values stayed fairly flat following the recession until this year. How many of you noticed that your bills from the county auditor went up because your home values went up substantially? Okay. What you will hear from the county auditor's office is that this is a reappraisal year. They went out and did physical reappraisals and also looked at sales data. And because we've now moved far enough beyond the recession, values of homes are starting to pick up again. They will also tell you that within this number is also starting to reappear some new construction of homes in the school district. So the district is beginning to grow a little bit. It didn't actually start this year. In the years where you don't see any color at all, where it's just white lines, the differences between those years represents the new things that are being built, new houses that are being constructed. And we went from 352 to 355. That's a $3 million increase in residential, which means, if you remember, we are assessing houses at 35%. That $3 million increase is more like $9 million in houses. And so we've had, I don't know the community that well. Have you guys seen new house construction going on?
Very little.
Very little. Well, somebody must have built one big old house. LeBron, come over here. The bottom line is that you're starting to see an uptick on this side. Our commercial values had at one point been as much as 175 million. It dropped during the recession. And a lot of those drops from the commercial values are like strip malls and apartment buildings and doctor's offices and things that fall into that particular category. A lot of commercial businesses were pretty aggressive at actually arguing that their property was worth less, so they would pay less in taxes. So they were able to get their valuations dropped between 2012 and 2017. But just like residential values, the reappraisal brought those numbers back up again, but not to the level that they were originally. Our industrial values have been fairly flat throughout, just a little bit of an uptick. I don't know that there's any real industrial development or growth. Yes, sir.
Just wanted to point out, I guess, in the commercial valuations and the reappraisal through challenging the system is that most millages for schools are a fixed millage. I mean, so we pass a millage for fixing a dollar amount, right? So the middle school's raising $22 million. The millage goes up and down by the valuation of the district. So if somebody has a big apartment complex and they challenge their valuation and they win and no one else does, everybody else's taxes go up.
For fixed, yes, for fixed revenue.
Just keep that. Just want to make that point so people understand how that works. So.
Yeah, and that's going to be you guys are great because our next class is on how taxes work, and I'm going to take the time to explain because there's different types of taxes that have different types of functions to them, and I want you to get your hands around this. But this is our building block of understanding our property taxes because you've got these components. The biggest takeaway from this page is the pie chart. For we're going to learn there's two different types of taxes in the large sense. One of them is the fixed money tax, which is usually emergency levies and bond issues. They are split directly between residential tax or individual taxpayers and businesses. Right now, we have a 30-70 split, which means for every dollar in taxes that you decide to raise in the future, that would be a bond issue, property tax, or some other fixed dollar in property tax, businesses will pay 30 cents on the dollar, and then everyone else picks up 70 cents on the dollar. That's a pretty good mix, because usually a lot of college towns are more residential and not so much commercial, and they typically have a 70 or 80 or 90% share of the taxes on a local basis as individuals. Yes.
You mentioned earlier about entities being tax exempt. You just mentioned the university. The university properties are not taxed as real estate taxes that we're able to collect that money from. Is that correct?
Right. So the blanket statement is, generally speaking, they are not taxed. They may actually have a few pieces of property that are subject to taxation, but the vast majority of the real estate there is exempt from taxation.
And yet, they're essentially a for-profit business, universities are. Why are they not paying property tax on all of their properties?
Well, again, as a government, it's an exempt entity. It's a tax exempt entity, like the state of Ohio is a tax exempt entity, like the school district itself is a tax exempt entities, so they're not subject to taxation, except for assets that they own that might actually serve a private purpose or a shared private purpose. So for example, a county airport that has hangars that are used by a private company would pay taxes on a hangar, but not on the runways. So there could be some assets, but it's a common, long-standing exemption for governmental entities to be exempt from taxation.
So they don't pay taxes with blanket coverage, but all of our property values go up because of rentals to house all the kids that go to the college. So we're basically not losing money?
Well, you know, so
Surprise.
So it's a broader economic question. How many of you in this room know someone who is employed by or employed because of the university? Okay.
Everybody.
We wouldn't be here if it wasn't a university.
Okay. You've heard the term anchor. This community is anchored by the university. If the university were not here, you would not be Bowling Green City School District. You would be Patrick Henry Local School District.
Bowling Green Local School District, and the farmers would be out here.
That's right. And I don't mean that in a defamatory way about Patrick Henry, because they're also my client. But what you guys know Patrick Henry, what's there? Farms, right? Lots of farms, big farms. They don't have an anchor there, and their tax structure is totally different than your tax structure. They don't have as many kids, and they get funding from the state of Ohio, but they don't have any jobs outside of the farming community, and so it's a different dynamic. So there are some larger economic issues, and the point being, the university doesn't pay us any taxes as a taxpayer, but they do create an economic engine that supports the community in another way. And so I wouldn't necessarily beat them over the head because they're not paying taxes to the
Their
community.
salaries pay city school taxes and income tax. So
That's correct. So it's somewhat of an indirect way. You also raised another point that's a good question too, about renters. And so I want to tackle this because I work with a lot of communities where people have a large number of renters. You guys hold the record. You have the record on the number of renters in a community. Renters do pay taxes, they just don't know they're paying them. If you're a landlord that intends to stay in business as a landlord, you find a way to shift your expenses for the buildings that you rent to your renters, who in turn are paying those through the rents that they pay. Rental properties, if they're not a single family home, will fall into the commercial category.
You come up with this particular area, that brings up a weird dynamic, because you still have 12 other communities here. You know, if there's a rental property in Rudolph, in Liberty Township, or out in Custer, that university or the benefits of building a school building here have no effect on that rental rate, and that rate really can't be adjusted, because that market will only sustain what it'll sustain in those communities. So a lot of the 12 other communities that we have, those landlords cannot raise the rent because they'll price themselves out of the market. So we have to, yes, there's a lot of rentals in Bowling Green, they outnumber the ones outside of town by a bunch.
Yeah.
But most of those are low-income families that live outside in those smaller areas.
Yeah. So that's a very good point, and that's another group of people. Remind me of your first name again.
Grant.
Grant. And Grant, we'll at our next meeting, we're going to get into the issue of, you mentioned low-income people. This community has segments of very affluent people, very middle-class people, and very low-income. And everyone is affected differently by new taxes. And so we have to be aware of who they are, where they are, and how any decisions that you make have an impact on those folks. And I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to do that at the next meeting. But we're starting the day, to a degree, better off than a lot of school districts by having 30% of our taxes paid by businesses. I will say, though, these categories of taxpayers, and then we have utility personal that also falls into business. I will challenge you to think about something. Some of these taxpayers are malls and other places. Fast forward the evolution of retail. You guys ever heard of a company called Amazon? Okay. And driverless cars,
Online schools.
and college kids that use these things to get stuff delivered to them. I'm not telling you I'm predicting anything about your tax base, but I think we need to think about something. Remember I told you today's a snapshot. You see this number right here? 2010, individuals were paying 65 cents on the dollar for fixed income taxes. 2018, you're paying 69 cents. It's creeping without having done anything at all, except values changing, yours changing faster than your business tax base. Will the value of businesses in this community decline at a more rapid rate as the world changes, as tariffs change, as economics change? And if so, is it possible that 10 years from now, this pie looks totally different than it does today and not in the favor of the individual taxpayer? So back to this issue of thinking about the future, thinking about tax policy. Sometimes you do things because you kind of know where you're going. If I know I can get some money from people today that may not be here 10 years from now, it's kind of crafty. Especially if you're a landlord, get it when you can. If we're thinking about getting some money, unless somebody has a secret knowledge about what might be happening in our commercial tax base and our industrial tax base, as we develop this plan, we might be thinking about how we might move quicker than slower in order to trap that portion of our tax base. They don't vote, by the way. We do. So just keep that in the back of your minds. All right, so let's talk about tax costs. Now, this is always a fun conversation for me. People like to beat me up on this particular slide, but I'll stand by it. All right, how much you pay in taxes is a lot. Everyone says, man, I pay a lot in taxes. And if you feel that you pay a lot in taxes, then you pay a lot in taxes because it's the way you perceive how you are. This table is not a perception table. This table is a reality table. So I deal in reality, not perception. Everyone at home can say, I'm paying a bunch in taxes. This table is a very simple analysis that says, David wants to compare the family in the middle of all families in all school districts that are near you. There's 16 of them. So the middlemost family in the 16 school districts that are around you, I want to compare them side by side to see how much are they paying out of their income for the school district, just the school district that they live in. And based on the current, so these are the median home values that are available from the Census Bureau for 2016, because that's the latest that's available. As a basis, so the property taxes are calculated against each of their values. Then I took the median family income, so that would be the true family members, not just renters living in an apartment. That's, if you look at median household income, you're actually looking at people that live in a household that may not be related. And usually, there are people that live in a household that are not related, or students, or someone else that don't earn a lot of money, so the number is almost always lower than the median family income. So I use the median family income to calculate how much they pay in income taxes, as well as how much the overall taxes are a percent of. So how much are they paying? And I use the current property tax rate that's in effect, and that's for all school taxes. And then I use the income tax that's in effect for all income taxes, if in fact the district has one. Calculate the median property tax based on the median home value, and the median income tax based on the family income, and I total it up. Then I take the total tax for that median family and divide it by their income and come up with a percentage. So based on that percentage, each one of these school districts rank 1 to 16. Bowling Green is currently the 5th lowest fifth lowest. I get turned around on that. At 2.788%. This is just a snapshot of the median family. This table does not measure quality. So you're paying 2.78% of your income as a median for this particular district relative to these other districts. I don't know how you see yourselves compared to these other communities from a quality perspective. So it's one thing to say, I'm Ottawa, and I pay 5.2% of my income for my Ottawa school district, but I believe that Ottawa is the creme de la creme of school systems. And that I'm in Lake, and I pay 2.56%, and maybe Lake thinks they're the creme de la creme of school districts. I don't know. Yes, sir.
Ottawa Hills is a massive outlier for the surrounding schools. Could you reproduce this without them in it?
Yeah, just drop that last line.
Well, no, I'm looking at, you've got your sample median. I'm sure that's, Ottawa Hills is skewing that up. So, I mean, the sample median without them is probably close to what, 2.8, 2.9 instead of 3.0. It just gives a false median basically because they're so far out.
It's a median, not a mean.
Right.
True.
Right.
So therefore.
That's why I use me. But no, I mean, Greg.
Forgive me. You're right.
Your point's well taken, and I can absolutely change it.
Yeah.
But the end conclusion is really more.
Yeah.
At 2.788%. Now, what I'll say, let me make a statement. What I'll say is that 2.788% means absolutely nothing. Okay? It means absolutely nothing. What means something is if you feel like what you're paying for your school district is worth the money that you're paying for. That's what means something. Okay? This is just giving you some idea of, because everybody feels like they're getting something for the districts they live in, otherwise they would move to another school district and pay less. And now I'll take your question. You second her first.
I know for the census, when they do the census, that university students are not counted in their homes, they're counted in the city where they're going to school. So when they calculate median family income, is that for the remainder of the family, and then how do students get counted into this?
Yeah, it's we'll have to call the people at the Census Bureau. You should see the website. This gentleman had a question, and then I'll come back to the.
Yeah, I don't base so much on these percentages here. I base mine on the median family income. And when you're living in Bowling Green at 65,992, and you're talking about Perrysburg and a lot of relationships with what schools are so nice, when you're making $40,000 more, I guess I could put a little more into taxes.
Yeah. So the sort of the ability to pay more, and that's why I use this particular model. This particular model is designed so. A lot of people stop at this column, just the total cost. But total cost by itself doesn't tell you how hard it is to pay that number, okay? So the guys over here at Perrysburg, their total cost is $3,330 a year, which would have no relevance if we're looking at things unless you understood that their average income is $100,000 a year. So they have a heck of a lot more money to pay toward their taxes. Who has the least amount? Toledo. Toledo.
Yeah.
And Toledo is only $1,197 for the median family, but because their incomes are lower, that's hitting them in the pocketbook a little bit. Now the next class that we get into, there's also a correlation between some of these numbers, some of these tax rates and the amount that people pay and how much the state contributes to those districts. And you're going to find that you won't be happy that we don't get as much from the state of Ohio as half the districts on this list right here, which is in and of itself kind of amazing that our overall tax cost isn't worse than what we're showing on this table. Yes, sir.
So that leads to me. I have two questions. Would you be able to correlate our gross income to the number of students?
Yes.
So we could say, so then we could compare how we're doing against our neighbors here.
Yeah, yeah, oh, yeah.
'Cause we may be low, I don't know.
So just kind of a median family income per, per student?
How many gross dollars come into this district
Cost per student.
divided by the number of students in the district? So maybe Perrysburg's
Oh, yeah, yeah.
collecting,
Yes, that is
you know, twice as much money per student as we are.
next week. Yes, sir. I have it, it's already done, actually.
And
It's-
then, great.
Yeah.
So the next question would be, I'm not doubting the 65,000. God forbid we question the census Bureau. But I'm wondering how that relates to our children that are on reduced lunch program. So if they're at $65,000, I'm kind of doubting whether they
So that-
qualify for reduced. So that should tell us whether the students that are here and the taxpayer base is here can really afford. And
Well, so the median is the middle family. So there are half as many people that make less than that number and half as many people that make more than that number. So you will clearly have a
But
fair number
that's
of
where
people.
you know, we got to draw this down to us,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and we're on our way.
Okay.
Yeah, you're walking right along the road with me.
I'm good.
Yeah, so our next meeting, these are things that I've already shown you. So we have it, we're just gonna go back over it. Some of you weren't in some of the earlier meetings I did with the district, but I've got an additional breakdown on your income. Yes, sir.
A breakdown like that, but based on district size, so we can compare ourselves to other districts with about 3,000 students, as opposed to just districts that happen to be close to us, even if they don't,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, there are another 100 school districts around the state of Ohio that have 3,000 students. Would you like to give me some additional parameters to compare yourself against? College towns,
I would say
schools located off of major
something with
interstates.
similar median incomes, median home prices.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
Ones with similar median incomes and median home prices.
That also have 3,000 students?
Shouldn't be very many.
I think you're it. Yeah, but I can, so these are things that I can absolutely put together for you. I want to be, again, really clear and honest and fair with you. Tell me what you hope to find out, and there might be a different way to approach it instead of me spending 2 days doing an analysis to provide data that doesn't help us make a decision beyond what we already know.
Compare us to Athens.
Athens?
Yeah, I don't know what school districts are down there around Ohio University.
I can do that.
But it's a
compare you
small
to-
town, agricultural community. I don't know if they're as big, I'm sure they're not as big as we are, but.
We'll see them. We'll bring them up and look at them. So we'll put down Athens. Yes, sir.
I'd like to get more, since this is Bowling Green School District. We talk about the university. Naturally, the university's got the professors and some of the higher paid wages in the community versus how many low income people, families do we have compared to the higher income people? Have we got, in other words, 50,000, no, I don't even know that, 30,000 high paid to a certain degree, and that, but the lower 20 and 30, you got double the size. That's going to inflate who is going to be taking this tax burden.
So what we wanted to have, Julie, is a distribution of income to the number of the population. That's another census report that I can just print right out and show you how it breaks down. Okay, so let's move to the next page. And this is moving to our box. So I wanted to get off of this. This is sort of establishes where we're going to move into the next time we get together, all of this data is going to be more detailed. We're going to move into more detailed demographic analysis, and we're just building on it. So, yes.
If you email out your next presentation, can you have a glossary for everybody that's not familiar with all the different verbiage? Like what the differences of a millage versus a bond versus a levy versus, just different things like that, because there's different ways that you get them. and then whether you renew a levy or when a bond expires, it's done. Just some basic glossary terms as we continue to go on so that people can keep up.
Yep, so what would work better for me, because there's like so many terms, is, especially in this particular room, as we go through it, any term that you want me to define, say, hey, David, could you put that in our glossary book, and that way I can be a little more efficient at getting you definitions for the words. And I meant to tell you when I started to do that, and I apologize. Our industry has terms that are like a mill. I don't even know what that means, but I can tell you how it works. Don't hesitate to ask me what these things are, and then we'll build a terminology book for the group as we go through. So just when I say a word, just put your hand up and go, what does that mean? And because sometimes I forget that I've been talking about this stuff for 30 years. All right, so election history. The reason I want to go through your election history is that you actually have a track record of how people.
Just back up 1 second. I had my hand up, not to stop. Can I get some clarification on the census? Did someone say that the census counts university students?
They weren't sure. They weren't sure, and they want us. We want to look into how they count a student that lives at home with the family. Is that right?
No, because students are low income.
Right.
University students are low income. Some of them may work, may have a job, but they're going to be low income. So how do they fit into the median family income?
So I was reading into that so students that are not related to the people that they live with are not counted in the family income figure. But I thought you were saying for people that are students that do live at home, how do they get counted?
Well, that's
another
part of it.
Yeah, so I was going to, the Census Bureau has an FAQ that has a, it's like, yeah, if I had my other computer, I'd tell you. So let's talk about your election history. I wanted to focus on their bond issues first. This community has a really long history. Well, this is as far back as I can get right now. 1987 was a bond issue done for 5.95. That was a 23-year issue. Back in those days, the state of Ohio, you'll notice that the terms, 23, 28, 37. Have you guys heard about 50-year mortgages that you can get on your house now? They exist. 50 years. 50. 50. Yeah. Have you guys also heard that we're making the same amount of money that we made in 1977? Yeah. Do you know how we continue to, how our country continues to allow us to afford? Yeah. Allows us to afford to continue living without wage increases? That. Financing has continued to stretch. I remember we used to pay cash. I was talking about communities that went from never borrowing money to now doing, schools can do bond issues for 40 years. State of Ohio changed the law about 5 years ago to say that you can now issue bonds for 40 years. 40.
In the financial industry, is that wise?
Is that wise?
Yes.
Well, is it practical for some communities? Maybe, but is it wise? I don't necessarily think it is, especially with building materials and labor and things, the way that I'm literally having to finance reconstruction of buildings that are 10 years old right now. 10 years old.
How many of those were built under the school facilities program?
110%. So, maybe not 110%. A lot. So within all these things are some fascinating items. But I will tell you, we've only passed 2 bond issues in this stretch of the road. And there's only been 5 requests back since 1987. I wanted to show you the breakout for each one. This is the 87 issue. It was $5 million, 2.2 mils for 23 years. And then this one was $43 million for 5.4 mils, and it was defeated. And the district came back and dropped that to $27,500,000. So I don't know what this one originally included in it. It may have included in it the elementary schools, or does anyone remember the 2005 bond issue?
I can tell you how it got passed. They took away our fifth grade camp and threatened a bunch of other takeaways in the school district if we would pass something.
Well, they reduced it too. I mean, they went from 43 million down to 27.
That's back. They cut a lot of the construction costs back. And that's what
the permanent improvement fund to make up the
Okay. So,
He said he used the permanent improvement
So the-
to make up the difference.
that was later.
okay.
No.
And so that number is, that's the middle school, right? Yep. And then obviously we're aware of the 17 and 18 attempts. That's why we're sitting in this room today. And the millage was at 6 mils. It went down to 5.7 simply because you remember the value. I showed you that your tax values went up a lot last year. That's what caused the millage rate to go down. So as your tax base gets larger, the tax rate goes down for a bond issue. It's a fixed income tax. Yes.
Something that jumps out at me is that the 2006 vote had between 10 and 11,000 people voting, and the others are all in the 7,000, 8,000 range. Does anybody know why so many more people voted in 2006?
It
But
was,
not a
there was
presidential.
bunch of, wasn't it a midterm election?
November of 06,
Not a presidential.
it may have been a governor election,
Yeah, and there were
gubernatorial.
some other things on the ballot at the same time. That would probably reconstruct that.
Well, needless to say, the history, when you look at your history for buildings, it's clear that it's something that this community takes work to get done. It's not, you don't just pass a building levy. But more important is how supportive is the community for the operations of the school district. And the reason that we need to know that is that you can have a building sitting out there nice and pretty, but if you don't have any money to operate it, it doesn't do you any good. So part of our responsibility is to think about the operations of the district. Now this is a whole different story than the page before. The first thing that comes, jumps out at me is this. We've got a lot more green up and down the charts. I'm not going to touch that. I'll mess it up. You want to fix it for me? All right. Well, the bottom, there's a. Oh, that's hot.
That's why he didn't want to touch it.
Well, going back to 1992, the bottom tables are income tax levies, and started in 1992. The first one went out and just barely was defeated, and then you came back and approved it, and now you have it sort of existing in a 5-year interval, which the community's been pretty supportive of. The last time it passed, 74.5%, 74.89%. You all don't have the benefit of what I do, because I look at this stuff all the time for every school district around the state. For a renewal levy post-recession, that's a really, really high passage rate. Really, really high passage rate. It says a lot about the community's attitude toward the district and about the income tax and about the renewal itself. Typically renewals were a slam dunk to get passed in every school district in the state, but after the recession, a lot of renewal levies either failed or barely passed by just a handful of votes. So when I saw that, I thought, man, that's amazing. But all in all, a real strong election history. Now, let me pop it back down, thank you. So I do another analysis too, and I refer to it as my voter trend analysis.
Hey, Dave, real quick, what does the CPT stand for under years?
There you go. All right, let me, current expense, that means operating. Emergency is another word that's used that also is money that goes for operations, but it's passed using a term called emergency so that it creates a fixed money tax versus the variable tax. So anytime you see emergency, that's a fixed money tax that works like a bond issue, where it's shared by the businesses 70-30. permanent improvement is the permanent improvement levy. Looks like it was renewed in 1989, so it must have been passed somewhere prior to
On your
1989.
years, it says CPT, that's what you.
Yeah, just wondering what that is.
Yeah, CPT stands for continuing period of time. Some people like to refer to them as the forever tax. But let me tell you, no tax is forever. Why?
Yeah.
Huh? No. No, early on, gang, what's no taxes forever because we're in control, right? We're not victims. If you don't want to pay a tax, you can repeal it.
And just a quick clarification.
I don't know about that.
I say, when does that ever happen?
No, there has been some repeal.
Currently,
that still would
you
like
guys
to
have a
repeal it.
traditional, so here's another word for the terminology book. Your income tax that you have down here, a current expense, traditional school income tax. It taxes everyone. Senior citizens, 18-year-olds, if they're a resident, and a school, and this is class number 3. A school income tax only taxes residents. It does not tax businesses. So that 70-30 pie becomes 100% individuals. Businesses do not have to pay an income tax to a school district, only to a city. And that's why I said if you guys want to think about these dynamics of they have to pay to a city if we do a city income tax, but not to a school if we do a school income tax. So the dynamics will start to come together. So CPT means continuing period of time, or the forever tax, or we can repeal that if we get tired of paying it. And they've been around for a while. Yes,
I thought there's been some school districts that have repealed it though. They took it to court and I think it was overturned. They would not even let them repeal it.
I'm not sure about that. I haven't heard
I'm
that, but I
pretty
do
sure.
have some school districts where taxes have been in fact repealed. So, yeah.
But I think they went up even to the Supreme Court and they would not let them repeal it.
The only circumstance that would exist in currently would be the tax is used for a bond issue. So sometimes you can pass a specific tax for the purposes of paying a bond. And if the bond is outstanding and investors are relying on the tax to pay the bond back, then I can see them upholding that. But if it's for any other purpose, I don't think they would, that would stand. But of course, I'm not a Supreme Court nominee, thank God, because Lord knows what would come out and people would be trying to get me. All right, yes, sir.
Just a clarification. So you're saying that rental businesses don't pay income?
Businesses do not pay income tax. So when you're talking about your traditional business, and when you say
home park owner pays,
depends on how mobile home park owner is structured as a business.
I can vouch for that.
So I have a very good accountant, and my accountant tells me how to avoid certain taxes, and I'm sure that certain businesses are pretty savvy.
Business pays an income tax.
Right. I'm sorry.
Agricultural business pays an income.
It
is their income,
mm-hmm.
So they're paying a tax.
Right.
Any DBA pays it as an individual.
Right. So, when we're dealing with looking at forms of taxation, we're not looking at our ability to shelter taxation. So everybody has an ability, whether we're individuals, we're farmers, we're businesses, to make our income appear to be less than it really is, or to actually be less than it really is, in which case it reduces our tax liability. But at the end of the day, you cannot escape, as a community, paying taxes for the community that you live in. It will come to get you. It's much like the economic question of, does the college benefit us or hurt us because they don't pay taxes? When taxes, it's an equation, it's simple math. If this group isn't paying a tax, someone else must. And if that group has to pay a tax that they can't afford, it changes the dynamics of how other taxes have to be paid and increases the taxes on the other end of the ledger, which then causes everybody to pay more. So it becomes a global basic algebra formula over how taxation works. And by the time we get to meeting 12, you're going to understand the inner workings of all of this. And be able to explain it to your neighbors.
I'd say my CPA told me that if I moved out of the city school district, I would save $400 a year. So it's because I pay the 1.5% because I work in Toledo. So yeah.
But you pay
Exactly.
taxes.
So let's get back to this. I want to end on a really good note. And one of the reasons that you guys are all sitting in the room, and one of the reasons that the engagement has been so good going through this, is that you as a community like your school district and you care, and I can tell because this chart has a bunch of moving lines, but I track the percentage rate that you pass the school district's levies by. And generally, people don't pay for something they don't like. It's a basic rule of thumb. You typically will pay for something that you're okay with or you like, and you won't pay for things you don't like. And the red line shows that back in the year 1985, we were not as in love with the district in terms of how we voted as we are now. The red line is a trajectory or a trend line that shows our overall passage rate of each of the levies for the operations of the school district going forward. And we have continued to approve the district's income taxes, PI levies, and operating levies at a greater percentage each time the district has gone to the community to ask for your support. That's one of the reasons I take what I'm doing seriously. This community cares a great deal about the school district. This community supports the school district, as evidence here, and we owe it to them, to you, to do a really good job, to do this well, to be smart, and to preserve the trust that people have put in this district since 1985. It's a pretty remarkable trend line. I don't see, usually it starts here and goes this way. This is a pretty remarkable trend line. It's something that you guys as a community should be proud of. It's something you should know about your neighbors and yourselves, that this isn't a group of people that have turned their back on a school district or don't like the district. It's a community that wants to know more and wants to be better at doing what you're doing, and that's where we are today. So I wanted to kind of get to that point and then wrap up. So what have we learned today? Bowling Green is a large school district. The bus drivers love it. Full employment. Lots of communities, not just the city. The school buildings are paid for except for the middle school. Businesses are a major contributor to tax revenues. However, we're not so sure that will be the case 30 years from now. And we need to keep that in the back of our mind and do a little bit of research as we go forward. We know that the district's tax cost is moderate when we take a snapshot of where we are today and when we separate perception from reality. Okay? And our tax base, we're fortunate, again, no one likes taxes, but we're fortunate that we're starting the day with a large tax base, and we're not Patrick Henry, and we're not a school district that only has $100 million of tax base to work with. Our bond issues have had mixed results, which is why we're sitting in this room, but our district has been highly supportive of operating levies. And lastly, the community support has really grown and it's demonstrated a strong track record over the last 20 years. So these are the takeaways from today. Our next meeting, I'm on time, our next meeting is going to be a little more details. We're going to have the demographic stuff. I'm going to have the analysis done that we can kick around and look at some of the comparable communities with population sizes. I will bring my second laptop and try to get up another screen where we'll bring up our Census Bureau and some of my data reports, and we can actually go right to the data and look at it as we go through the presentation. So that'll be the next meeting. Speaking of which, when would you guys like to have your next meeting? Do you have a date in mind?
Third Wednesday of
After
October.
harvest. November?
November or October?
November 28th.
October. Second Wednesday of November.
October 17th.
Gonna have to watch for his facilities committee.
Yeah, say, when is the facilities meeting?
When's the facilities meetings?
Facilities meeting, someone called me earlier today, October 11th, I think?
Yes.
Yeah, October 11th is the facilities
Make
meeting.
sure we don't schedule the same day.
Oh, we couldn't handle it. There'd be no way. 2 hours, 4 hours of, I'm hearing the 17th is a day,
Are we meeting in October or November?
October.
So the third Wednesday again?
Yep. That would be the 17th, right?
Yep.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, so here's another important question. I did hear from someone today that said 7 o'clock is too late if we're going to be here till 9. And I want to be fair to that person. 7?
7's fine.
Okay. All right. Okay. Now, for the most important, second most important, is this room going to be okay?
Yes. I mean,
Well,
it's open. Nobody else is in here, so.
Can you get some?
Remember, it's October, though. The heat will subside
Oh,
by
like a
the
mic?
first week October.
You know what happens when I get a microphone? I am like karaoke. Oh. I am like the best karaoke singer you've ever heard, ever. And I will believe that until the day I die. So 7 p.m.
I still have a,
I want to make sure everyone signs.
Oh, did everyone sign in?
No.
We didn't get this one.
And then I have someone that's going around and we're doing a DNA test and keeping records on everyone. Justin, do you have a question? No, okay. I just laughing at you.
17th at 7 then?
7, I'm sorry?
17th
The
at 7.
17th at 7. And for those of you that can't get here, just email me like you did. Well, you're not here to hear this. For those of you who can't, that weren't here today, I'll get you the materials. Any one of you call me after I don't mind, call me, email me. If I'm not doing something, I'll answer the phone. And we'll go back through this and get explanation. The only thing I won't do is send you something that I haven't given to everyone else. So just contact me and we'll go through it. When? October the 11th. All right.
Plan our next meetings for like the third Wednesday, can we just plan them for that, like that be our plan?
Yeah, we can do that. So everyone just mark the third Wednesday as a whole, but I'm always open to, you know,
Except for November,
sometimes
right?
things
That's
happen.
Tuesday.
Right, yeah. All right, gang, thank you all. It's nice to see you again.